The first time the 7/8 scale Chevelle rolled onto a track, no one knew what they were witnessing. It was smaller than the other cars, almost comical at first glance, yet it carried a presence that made veteran drivers uneasy. A compact silhouette, perfectly balanced, almost mischievous in its proportions. But inside, under the hood, was an engine that defied understanding. An engine so cunning, so precise, that it made the Chevelle faster, lighter, and more agile than anything NASCAR had anticipated. Smokey Yunick didn't build cars to fit the rulebook. He built machines to expose the cracks in it, and this Chevelle, scaled down to 7/8 of its official size, was no exception. To officials, it seemed like an experiment, maybe even a harmless novelty. To competitors, it was a nightmare in disguise. It challenged every assumption about weight, aerodynamics, and power-to-weight ratios. With each lap, the little car chipped away at their confidence. Tires squealed, engines strained, and pit crews whispered in disbelief. The Chevelle was too fast, too clever, too precise to be legal, or so they thought. The audacity of the design lay in its size. By reducing the scale, Smokey altered physics in subtle, devastating ways. The reduced weight meant less fuel consumption, more cornering grip, and faster acceleration. Yet the engine produced the same output as a full-sized machine. Competitors began to notice a pattern. Races ended before they expected, pit strategies crumbled, and every calculation based on conventional logic failed. NASCAR inspectors, already wary of Yunick's reputation, began to suspect trickery, but what they could see with their eyes made no sense. The car fit every visual measurement. It looked compliant. It was supposed to be legal, yet every metric said otherwise. The first race, against full-size Chevelles, was a turning point. The miniature marvel took the green flag, almost shyly, tucked behind the giants of the track. By the second lap, it was out in front, a blur of black and gold precision. Rival drivers gawked in horror as the little Chevelle danced through corners they had only dreamed of hitting with full-sized machines. Officials scrambled, comparing timing sheets, lap after lap, desperately trying to find an error, but there was none. Every calculation confirmed what they feared. This smaller car was dominating without breaking any written rule. The garage became a theater of tension. Mechanics argued, engineers fumed, and NASCAR officials began to circulate rumors that something had to be hidden, something had to be illegal. Every inspection felt like an interrogation, every measurement a test of nerve. Smokey Yunick, meanwhile, stood calm, almost indifferent, as if he knew exactly how the chaos would unfold. The man who had already outsmarted the system with secret fuel tanks, outlawed engines, and hidden modifications, now introduced a creation that wasn't just breaking rules, it was bending reality itself. Rumors of the 7/8 Chevelle spread like wildfire through the paddock. Some crews laughed, thinking it a gimmick. Others feared it, knowing that Yunick's brilliance often masked deadly competitive advantage. The car wasn't just smaller. Its dimensions, combined with finely tuned suspension and engine placement, gave it a handling profile that full-size competitors couldn't replicate. Cornering speeds were higher, braking points were later. Acceleration off turns was instantaneous. It was, in every practical sense, untouchable. And yet, the rules written in ink and reinforced by decades of racing tradition offered no provision for such ingenuity. By mid-season, the Chevelle's presence had shifted from curiosity to controversy. Races, once predictable, were now tactical nightmares. Drivers feared the little car not because it was flashy, but because it was invisible in its cunning. The Chevelle forced them to rethink every decision: fuel load, tire choice, pit timing, even mental approach. NASCAR, for its part, had never faced a problem quite like this. Their measurements were literal, their inspections were procedural, their assumptions were flawed. Smokey Yunick had not just introduced a car, he had introduced a paradox. And on one humid afternoon at Charlotte Motor Speedway, the paradox revealed itself fully. The 7/8 scale Chevelle lined up on the grid, dwarfed by its competition, engines roaring in anticipation. When the green flag dropped, it surged ahead with a precision that made onlookers gasp. Cameras flashed, pit crews shook their heads, and officials jotted frantic notes. By the end of the first lap, it was clear NASCAR had never seen a machine like this. They couldn't stop it, couldn't fully comprehend it, and wouldn't be able to explain it. The car was legal, impossible, and unstoppable, a perfect embodiment of Smokey Yunick'S philosophy. Obey the letter, destroy the spirit, and leave the system questioning itself. The Chevelle wasn't just a car, it was a statement. It was the first time the racing world realized that intelligence, audacity, and creative defiance could outrun brute horsepower. And it was only the beginning. The explosive truth behind the 7/8 scale Chevelle would soon force NASCAR into panic, inspire obsession, and leave a trail of baffled officials and humiliated competitors in its wake. Inside Smokey Yunick'S Daytona Beach garage, the 7/8 Chevelle wasn't just a project, it was a manifesto. The air was thick with oil, smoke, and gasoline, a sensory assault that spoke of obsession. Every wall was lined with engine blocks, camshafts, and schematics scrawled in cryptic codes that only Smokey could decipher. Mechanics whispered of tunnels carved into frame rails, fuel lines hidden inside chassis braces, and engine components that seemed to defy conventional logic. To the untrained eye, it was chaos. To Smokey, it was the architecture of rebellion. The idea of shrinking a full-sized Chevelle to 7/8 scale was genius precisely because it appeared compliant. At first glance, NASCAR inspectors saw only a smaller car. They measured, they weighed, they ticked boxes and found nothing. Every outward sign of legality was present. But the reduction in size was no gimmick. It was a calculated disruption. By decreasing mass while maintaining engine output, Smokey created a vehicle that accelerated faster, handled sharper, and burned fuel more efficiently than any standard car. The combination was devastating. Rival engineers called it impossible. Competitors called it cheating. Officials called it a headache they couldn't solve. Every element of the car was meticulously orchestrated. The engine itself was a high-output marvel, tuned for both power and reliability. But its brilliance wasn't in raw horsepower. It was in synchronization, cam timing, carburation, and fuel delivery were optimized for a smaller chassis, allowing the car to corner at speeds that seemed reckless yet precise. Suspension geometry, weight distribution, and tire selection were calculated down to ounces, angles, and degrees. To a casual observer, the Chevelle might have looked like a scaled-down novelty. In reality, it was a lethal combination of physics and audacity, engineered to exploit every blind spot in NASCAR's rulebook. Smokey's workshop operated under a code of secrecy that bordered on ritual. Mechanics rarely saw the full picture. Components were installed without question. Every bolt, every tube, every hidden junction had a purpose understood only by Smokey. Workers learned to trust the system without comprehending it, a necessary precaution in a world where disclosure meant disqualification, or worse, sabotage. Many believe rival teams attempted to infiltrate the garage, but Smokey anticipated every attempt. Cameras, diversions, and compartmentalization ensured that even if someone glimpsed a tube or a valve, the significance would remain invisible. Fuel strategy, a hallmark of Yunick's innovation, was central to the Chevelle's advantage. The 7/8 scale chassis allowed for clever repositioning of fuel tanks and lines, creating redundancy that let the engine draw precisely what it needed at any moment. Officials thought they understood fuel flow, but Smokey had rewritten the rules without touching a word on paper. The system was compliant, audacious, and invisible, every inspector's nightmare. Pit crews later admitted that even they struggled to follow the logic. The car seemed almost alive, responding to throttle and cornering with uncanny intelligence. By the middle of the 1967 season, whispers became headlines. Mechanics, journalists, and rival engineers speculated endlessly about the Chevelle's performance. How could a car smaller than the competition dominate at speeds it had no right to sustain? How could a vehicle seemingly devoid of advantage outperform full-sized Chevelles consistently? Many admitted privately that Smokey's genius wasn't just mechanical, it was psychological. The car unsettled competitors before it even reached the track. Officials, meanwhile, were caught in a loop of frustration. Every inspection failed to reveal the secret. Every penalty seemed impossible. And Smokey? He smiled quietly in the corner, cigarette smoke curling around his hat, knowing that he had once again made the system irrelevant. The garage became more than a workspace. It was a proving ground for every law of racing to be bent, tested, and broken. Engineers, who later tried to reverse engineer the Chevelle, discovered the complexity was almost surgical. Frame members were hollowed to conceal lines, suspension arms doubled as fuel channels, and the engine's oil and cooling system were integrated in ways that eliminated conventional limits. It wasn't just ingenuity, it was audacity paired with precision. Rival teams later confessed that no single feature alone explained the Chevelle's performance. It was the sum of invisible, interconnected systems, all orchestrated by one man who treated NASCAR as a sandbox to bend reality. What truly set the 7/8 Chevelle apart wasn't just the technology, it was the philosophy. Smokey understood that racing wasn't won by engines alone. It was won by foresight, anticipation, and the willingness to exploit every assumption. The Chevelle wasn't designed to cheat in the conventional sense. It was built to render the concept of cheating irrelevant. Every lap it led, every corner it clipped, every rival it embarrassed was a statement. Rules were written for the unimaginative, and Smokey Yunick was not one of them. And as word of the 7/8 Chevelle spread through pits, garages, and boardrooms, one reality became clear. NASCAR had never faced a problem like this. Not just a faster car, not just an ingenious engine, but a creation that was psychologically destabilizing, mechanically perfect, and legally untouchable. The stage was set for confrontation, and the world of stock car racing would soon realize that this small, outlaw Chevelle carried a threat far larger than its size, suggested a threat that no inspection could fully contain. The 1967 season had reached its boiling point, and the 7/8 Chevelle was no longer a secret. It was a legend whispered in garages and paddocks alike. Officials, mechanics, and journalists gathered at the superspeedways with the same mixture of awe and dread. They had seen small miracles before, but nothing that combined audacity, legality, and raw dominance like Smokey Yunick'S creation. It wasn't just a car, it was a challenge laid bare for anyone who dared enforce the rules. The tension was palpable as the Chevelle rolled onto the track at Charlotte. Competitors bristled, adjusting mirrors and revving engines with forced confidence. NASCAR inspectors lingered near the pit wall, clipboards trembling with suspicion, fully expecting that the secret would reveal itself the moment the green flag dropped. But the car remained calm, unassuming, almost defiant in its diminutive size. Every official knew something extraordinary was about to unfold, and they were powerless to stop it. From the start, the performance was otherworldly. The Chevelle launched off the line with acceleration that made larger competitors look sluggish. Corners were clipped with precision, tires gripping asphalt in a way that seemed impossible given the car's reduced scale. Fuel consumption and pit strategy areas that usually betrayed overambitious modifications were flawless. Lap after lap, the Chevelle maintained speeds and consistency that defied expectation. Rival teams watched in disbelief as their carefully tuned machines struggled to match a car that technically shouldn't have been able to dominate. Onlookers noted subtle oddities. The Chevelle seemed to anticipate braking zones, its chassis balancing weight perfectly through turns, its engine responding to throttle input like a living organism. Mechanics later admitted that even from the pit lane, they could hear a rhythm, a synchronization between engine, suspension, and driver that was unnerving in its precision. Competitors whispered that the car's hidden engineering was more than clever. It was almost cruel in how it exposed their own limitations. Every corner cut, every lap led, was a slap to tradition, an affront to authority, and a humiliation for NASCAR officials who prided themselves on oversight. By mid-race, frustration turned to panic. Inspectors and executives convened in trailers and offices, poring over data and timing sheets, looking for an angle to challenge the Chevelle. Telephones rang off the hook. Meetings erupted into arguments. Some wanted to disqualify the car on technicalities. Others urged patience, fearing that any official action would make the situation worse. The truth was undeniable. They had no evidence of wrongdoing, and yet the Chevelle was breaking conventions with a calm, mechanical certainty that defied belief. NASCAR had built rules for predictable machines, but Smokey Yunick had built a machine that defied predictability itself. As the race progressed, drivers began reporting unusual behavior. The Chevelle's acceleration out of corners seemed effortless, its brakes barely stressed despite repeated high-speed deceleration. Some claimed that the car's suspension appeared to absorb momentum, redistributing it in a way that gave the driver near telepathic control. Others whispered about the engine, a small powerhouse that roared like a full-size V8, but never overheated, never hesitated, never betrayed the driver. Rivals accused each other of sabotage. Officials accused themselves of incompetence, and through it all, Smokey Yunick watched quietly from the pit, cigarette dangling, eyes half closed, almost amused by the chaos he had orchestrated. The climax came on the final lap. The Chevelle, already several car lengths ahead, appeared to glide over the asphalt rather than grip it. Competitors pushed their cars to the limits, but every attempt to catch the small outlaw ended in futility. As the checkered flag waved, the Chevelle crossed the line first again. Crew members, journalists, and officials alike stared in disbelief. Some later admitted they had seen faster cars on paper. Others swore they had felt the grip of a conventional race car outmatch the Chevelle in simulations, yet none had actually beaten it on the track. The victory wasn't just for speed, it was a demonstration that engineering ingenuity could nullify convention and make rules irrelevant. The aftermath was immediate and intense. NASCAR held emergency meetings behind closed doors, trying to decide how to respond to a vehicle that had technically obeyed every rule while humiliating every competitor. Engineers analyzed photographs, dissected blueprints, and interviewed pit crews, but the Chevelle's secrets remained elusive. Every move made by Smokey Yunick had been anticipated, every loophole exploited with surgical precision. What should have been a routine race had become a crisis of authority, a lesson in vulnerability that NASCAR had never intended to teach. For competitors, the lesson was brutal and personal. Seasoned drivers and veteran mechanics found themselves humbled by a car that operated as a single integrated system, a machine that was both fully legal and entirely unbeatable. For NASCAR officials, the lesson was existential. Rules are only as strong as the people who write them, and Smokey Yunick was a man who refused to be constrained by bureaucracy, paper, or fear. The 7/8 scale Chevelle wasn't just a car, it was a symbol, a warning, and a historical turning point in stock car racing. By the time the dust settled, the race had achieved more than a win. It exposed vulnerabilities, shattered assumptions, and set the stage for a battle that would stretch across garages, boardrooms, and raceways for the remainder of the season. Every lap the Chevelle led reminded everyone watching that innovation, audacity, and intellect could outmatch power, size, and regulation. NASCAR had faced brilliance before, but nothing that had moved, sounded, and dominated quite like this small outlaw Chevelle. After the checkered flag fell, the 7/8 Chevelle became more than a race car. It became a symbol of audacity, a whispered legend in garages from Daytona to Darlington. Officials scrambled to understand what had happened, to reconcile the fact that a car smaller than its competitors had dominated not through brute force, but through cunning, precision, and sheer ingenuity. NASCAR was humiliated, its authority shaken, its inspections exposed as inadequate. Smokey Yunick had done more than win a race. He had exposed the fragility of the system itself. In the weeks that followed, teams tried to replicate the Chevelle's performance. Engineers pored over photographs, blueprints, and eyewitness accounts. They examined tubing, engine mounts, and suspension geometry. They even attempted full-scale recreations, believing the secret lay in clever measurements or a unique component. None succeeded. Every mechanic who stepped into Yunick's pit realized the difference wasn't in the parts, it was in the mind behind them. Every innovation, every hidden advantage, had been integrated into the car as a single living system. The 7/8 Chevelle was a masterpiece of orchestration, a machine where every line, every curve, every bolt contributed to an outcome impossible to replicate by conventional thinking. NASCAR's reaction was swift and quietly, ruthlessly, corrective. Rules were rewritten, fuel allowances, weight restrictions, and scale limits were adjusted. Inspectors were given new authority and tools. What was once an open book had become a minefield of compliance. But even as the sanctioning body tried to claw back control, the Chevelle's performance remained unmatched. Smokey Yunick had already moved on to new ideas, leaving competitors and regulators to grapple with the uncomfortable truth. No amount of bureaucracy could cage the kind of intelligence that built the 7/8 Chevelle. For drivers who had raced against it, the Chevelle was a lesson in humility. Seasoned veterans swore they had never experienced a car that felt alive, that seemed to anticipate their every move while remaining fully compliant with the rules. Junior Johnson later admitted that driving it was like partnering with a sixth sense, a machine that knew what he wanted before he did. For rivals, it was a bitter pill, a humiliating reminder that rules, measurements, and oversight mean little when faced with someone who refuses to play by convention yet obeys the letter of the law. The legend of the 7/8 Chevelle spread beyond the track. Car enthusiasts, engineers, and journalists chronicled its story, each retelling, amplifying its mythos. Every mention carried the awe of a system designed to break the game without technically breaking any rules. Smokey Yunick had created not just a car, but a living statement. Innovation is the ultimate outlaw, and the mind behind it is untouchable. In garages across America, mechanics whispered his name with reverence and fear. If you wanted to cheat, do it like Smokey, they said, but everyone knew it was more than cheating. It was mastery. Even decades later, the Chevelle remains a case study in audacious engineering. Restoration experts have uncovered remnants of its design, tracing fuel lines, measuring chassis adjustments, and marveling at how every modification served a purpose beyond speed alone. Yet no one has ever fully recreated its genius. The car's power wasn't measured in horsepower or torque, it was measured in the chaos it inflicted on the rules, the humiliation it visited upon competitors, and the panic it caused within NASCAR itself. And as the years passed, the story hardened into legend. The 7/8 Chevelle became a symbol of rebellion in motorsport, proof that true innovation thrives not in compliance, but in the space where law meets imagination. Smokey Yunick had built more than a car. He had built a philosophy that brilliance can't be contained, that rules are only as strong as those who enforce them, and that sometimes the smallest machines cast the longest shadows. Some believe NASCAR eventually caught up. Others admit the Chevelle forced a permanent rethink in inspections and technical oversight. But those who saw it race know the uncomfortable truth. There are minds, and then there is Smokey Yunick. And for one brief, explosive season, a 7/8 scale Chevelle reminded the racing world that some outlaws cannot be stopped, not with regulations, not with measurements, and certainly not with fear. The question still lingers in the garages, in the pits, in the whispered legends of Daytona and beyond. How much of racing history was rewritten because one man refused to play small. By the end of the 1967 season, the 7/8 scale Chevelle had done more than win races. It had rewritten what it meant to compete. On the surface, it was smaller, almost comical, yet every lap it completed reminded the racing world that size, rules, and convention meant nothing against intelligence. NASCAR officials, engineers, and rival drivers alike faced the same disorienting truth. They were powerless against a machine that obeyed the letter of the law while dismantling the spirit of competition. Every race had become a lesson in humility, every inspection a reminder of human limitations, and every pit stop a theater of awe and frustration. The genius of the Chevelle was not in raw horsepower or flashy engineering. It was in orchestration. Every fuel line, every suspension adjustment, every engine calibration was part of a living system designed to exploit assumptions and anticipate challenges before they existed. Smokey Yunick had created a car that was legal, audacious, and untouchable, not by bending rules, but by thinking faster and smarter than anyone tasked with enforcing them. Competitors tried to reverse engineer its secrets. Officials tried to rewrite regulations to contain it, but the Chevelle, like its creator, had already moved beyond containment. It was a machine with foresight, precision, and a mischievous intelligence that made it untouchable. The Chevelle's influence spread far beyond Charlotte, Daytona, or Darlington. Across garages and racetracks, engineers and mechanics whispered of its ingenuity, marveling at a vehicle that seemed alive, almost sentient in how it anticipated cornering, braking, and acceleration. Drivers who piloted it spoke of a partnership with the car, a synergy that blurred the line between human and machine. And every competitor who faced it understood a painful lesson: mastery, when paired with creativity and courage, could not be regulated. NASCAR reacted cautiously at first, then with desperation. Rulebooks were amended, inspections intensified, and oversight tightened. But even as authority reasserted itself on paper, the psychological impact of the Chevelle endured. Smokey Yunick had proven that regulations can measure parts but not intent, that systems can govern data but not imagination, and that one brilliant mind could render an entire institution temporarily irrelevant. The Chevelle wasn't just a car, it was a challenge, a statement, and a warning wrapped into 7/8 of engineered perfection. Over the years, attempts to replicate the 7/8 Chevelle's performance mostly failed. Restoration experts traced fuel lines, examined chassis modifications, and marveled at the car's seamless integration of engine, suspension, and aerodynamics, but no one could fully replicate the foresight and cunning built into every inch. The secret wasn't just mechanical, it was strategic. Smokey had designed a machine where every component, visible or hidden, was a chess move ahead of everyone else. The Chevelle had turned the art of racing into a game of intellect, and every lap had been checkmate. The legend endured. Mechanics still speak of it in hushed tones. Engineers study it as a blueprint of audacity. NASCAR officials, even decades later, recount the panic it induced in inspection rooms and boardrooms alike. The 7/8 Chevelle became a symbol, a reminder that true innovation doesn't ask permission, doesn't wait for validation, and cannot be stopped by mere oversight. It was proof that rules exist to contain ordinary minds, but genius will always find the gaps. Smokey Yunick had done more than build a car. He had built a philosophy. He had shown that intelligence, audacity, and foresight could outperform brute force, tradition, and regulation. The Chevelle was a mirror held up to NASCAR itself, reflecting the limits of enforcement and the power of a mind willing to think beyond convention. And in that reflection, one truth became clear. In racing, as in life, the smallest outlaws can cast the longest shadows. For anyone who witnessed it, or even heard the stories later, the 7/8 scale Chevelle wasn't just a car, it was an era-defining statement. A moment when one man reminded the world that brilliance cannot be contained. Rules could measure it, inspections could follow it, and competitors could fear it, but none could stop it. And so the question lingers in garages, pits, and whispered legends to this day. How much of racing history was rewritten by one man, one car, and one vision that refused to play small? If you want to see the real story behind motorsport's most cunning creation and understand how Smokey Yunick made the system irrelevant, subscribe.